In business today, three things to know. First, business and finance leaders converge on Nigeria for the World Economic Forum on Africa. But kidnappings, violence, and political unrest threaten to steal the spotlight from what is now Africa's largest economy. Then, banks flee. As sanctions pile up, major U.S. banks reduce their exposure to Russia. And it's Cinco de Mayo. We'll speak with a mixologist about the best drink to make tonight. Hint, it's a margarita. And the fast-moving changes in the liquor business. Arise Xchange for May 5th starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. In 2 days, Nigeria will host some of the world's most influential leaders in business, finance, and government for the World Economic Forum on Africa. It is a showcase event for the nation that now has the largest economy in Africa, but there is growing unease over the nation over the terrorist group Boko Haram and the kidnapping of several hundred schoolgirls who are still missing. And the government of President Goodluck Jonathan appears powerless to do anything about it. Before we preview the World Economic Forum, we have this report. Tensions are mounting in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, where the World Economic Forum is set to begin Wednesday amid continuing threats from Islamic militant group Boko Haram. In mid-April, 276 boarding school girls were kidnapped from their beds and loaded into vans. While 53 have escaped, the remaining 223 have not been found in the week since, prompting many Nigerians to protest the government response.
What we are here to do is to let the government know that they should declare the identity of the kidnappers and release our daughters.
Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan pledged increased efforts in finding the girls.
We promise that wherever these girls are, we'll surely get them out.
On Monday, the terrorist group released a tape not only accepting responsibility for the kidnappings, but pledging that they would sell the girls into marriage. Boko Haram is also suspected of carrying out a bomb blast in Abuja last Thursday, the second such attack in just 2 weeks. With more on the state of Nigeria amid the upcoming World Economic Forum is Jake Bright, an expert on Africa and contributor to both the Financial Times and the Atlantic Courts. Jake, welcome back to Arise Xchange. Thank you.
Great to be back.
So this is a really big deal for Nigeria right now, and yet this embarrassment seems to be only picking up steam. The U.S. media, which has not done a lot of coverage on the kidnapping story, has all of a sudden started to accelerate. How big of an issue is this right now for Nigeria as they're about to host the World Economic Forum?
Well, it's definitely not anything what was planned. This is a major, major affair for Nigeria. It was time to come after their, big GDP announcement to become Africa's largest economy.
Just about a month ago.
Yeah, just about a month ago.
They rebased the GDP.
So they're bigger than South Africa now. They're the largest economy on the continent. And the idea was to go to, this World Economic Forum event, which has been under plans for a year, and they have 1,000 people coming, 10 heads of state. Big executives from GE, McKinsey, Nigeria's problems have kind of reared their ugly head right before this kickoff.
Have you heard any concern about those who are attending the conference about possibly not going?
I think everybody's concerned today, and I've been working with some editors that are actually getting on planes tomorrow. Nobody that I know has said I'm not going. I think that people realize that the Nigerian military is fairly robust, but also this is not going to be only their security exercise. There's so many other people involved that I think there's some confidence that they'll be able to maintain security.
So there are two issues. One is them able to maintain security, but the other issue is really sort of this overhang of how the government is dealing with this kidnapping situation, possibly ordering the arrest of protesters, for example, talking to the parents of these kids and saying, keep your mouth quiet. There are reports coming out about that. So how is that? Are any of these people attending the World Economic Forum going to say to the government, you have to stop that?
Well, I think I've been asked about this a lot. I think you have two issues. I mean, Boko Haram is not, it's uniquely Nigerian, but it's more linked to Islamic extremism, and that's a problem for the entire world. What I think Nigeria is more under the microscope for is how is the national state dealing with this problem of Islamic extremism in Africa. And I think there's a question of confidence. The president not speaking until last night was not really a confidence builder. And I think the jury's still out. Is the government of Nigeria in charge? Is there some degree of confidence that they're dealing with this in a way that reinsures citizens and reinsures all these investors they've now brought to look at Nigeria as an investment destination at this big forum?
Let's talk about this forum for a moment specifically. What do the attendees hope to get out of it?
Well, you know, the forum itself, I think, is a bit of a sign of progress in that the whole theme is very much on this. You know, Africa's been having, and Nigeria leading, having these big headlines about economic growth, about deal making, deal flow, FDI, and it's gone straight to this question of how is that affecting the everyday person? Mm-hmm. The theme is on inclusion and jobs, which is really a prominent issue if you speak to Africans on the street in Nigeria. So that's progress.
And that's a major issue, for example, in Nigeria, where the per capita income is still around $2,300 a year or so.
Well, that's, you know, I did this story in the Atlantic courts, which was trying to balance giving Nigeria its due for reaching this new status, but then looking at how does that balance with some of these glaring issues. You know, you have unemployment in 20-30%. Mm-hmm. You still have a lot of socioeconomic factors that are very dismal. And you still have a lot of people, you know, the consensus that I hear is, I think the average Nigerian is still proud to have the distinction, but then the questions come of how has this translated to me? And that's what the whole World Economic Forum is supposed to discuss.
And finally, Jake, this isn't just about Nigeria. This is the World Economic Forum on Africa. So how are the other countries participating in this event? And what do they hope to get out
Well,
of it?
I know there are heads of state there. And this is something that's very positive about the WEF in that a lot of times African heads of state have not been so accessible in public forums like this. So I know, for example, I interviewed the co-chair Binta Diop for the FT. And she's taking her issues on, you know, women's inclusion in economic development right to the heads of state. And, you know, that's an important forum for, you know, African civic leaders to be able to have. It's also a big forum for investors. But then again, it's positive on one hand, but investors are still watching Nigeria with a very wary eye. In some of these events, you know, they could turn their confidence. Hopefully they don't.
Okay, Jake Bright, we'll have you on afterwards to see how the conference does.
All right,
and
great.
Arise News will begin coverage of the World Economic Forum on Africa starting this Wednesday. U.S. equities closed moderately higher today as the Dow turned around a triple-digit loss. Let's take a look at the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 17.5 points to 16,535. The S&P 500 closing at 1884, and the Nasdaq ended up to 4138. Some stocks we're watching today. Global pharmaceutical company Pfizer reporting an $11.4 billion first quarter revenue, a 9% drop over the prior year period, missing analyst expectations of $12 billion. Pfizer closing down 79 cents. The competition heating up between Google and Amazon as both companies launch same-day delivery service within days of each other. Shoppers can shop for items to be dropped off in a chosen time period on Google Express. Amazon announced on Friday same-day service is being expanded in Los Angeles and other parts of the United States. Google up $1.50, and Amazon closing at $310 and a nickel. Looking at commodities, gold closing at $13.1050 up, oil pulling back under $100 at a barrel to $99.39. Several U.S. banks have cut their exposure to Russia as sanctions and poor Russian economies increase banking risks. To talk about this and other economic views on the agenda is Jim Awad. He's chairman of Plimsoll Capital. Jim, always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
What is going on right now in Russia and the U.S. banks? Several key banks, Citibank, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, sort of starting to, quote, reduce their risk. And I wonder how far that's going to go and what does it mean?
Well, it's only sensible that they do that. Given what happened in the financial crisis, I think they're very sensitive to risk. The geopolitical situation right now is getting worse, not better. And the risk is that we continue to put sanctions on Russia that damages their economy to the extent that credits in Russia are diminished and demeaned and that they can't pay back the money. So if you were a bank, why wouldn't you reduce your exposure? The bigger risk is that Russia counter-sanctions to Europe, which they are very heavily dependent trade-wise with each other, and that drags Europe down, which could blow back to the United States and to U.S. banks.
Citibank in particular has a pretty large exposure rate in Russia, doesn't it?
Yes, of the big banks here, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Citi is the largest, yes, absolutely.
It seems like Citibank bets on the wrong side often, isn't it?
Well, right now, don't forget 2 years ago it was Bank America, and they've come a long way. So you have to say that right now, of those three, they have the more porcupines around them. But hopefully they'll work their way.
When the banks cut back like this, does this impact the Russian economy?
Yes, absolutely, because the Russian economy depends on credit, and it depends on credit from Western institutions. So it absolutely, and that's the intention of the sanctions, to get U.S. businesses to do less business with the Russians, to influence their economy, to get the Russians to pull back their troops. It's a perfectly logical set of consequences.
And do the banks' reaction purely based on sanctions, or do you think that there's some sort of either internal or external political pressure on them?
Well, you never know what's going on behind the scenes here, and I have no idea, so I can't comment. But what you have to say is the economic situation in Russia wasn't good to begin with.
Yeah, no, they are close to a recession when this all started.
Right, and so even on its own, before all this, you'd want to be very careful about your risk to Russia. And then, of course, if we're going to tip them, it only makes sense that you reduce your exposure. And as I said, the bigger risk then becomes if there are counter sanctions on their part.
Okay, let's move and talk about the economy here in the United States. We had an unemployment report on Friday that is, like every one of them, mixed. Generally speaking, the participation in the labor market remains soft. But there's a Wall Street Journal article today that's really interesting, that an analysis of private workers shows wage pressure starting to kick in.
Yes.
What are we supposed to believe here?
Well, it's the first time you've seen a prominent article on wage pressure, although you've heard it specifically in particular industries such as home building or oil and gas, where there had been such cutbacks historically. But the signs are that the economy is accelerating a little, not a huge amount. And a little acceleration in key industries with a shortage of labor, where labor has left that industry for one reason or another, can lead to wage pressure. The larger question is that going to spread throughout the economy? The good part of that would be that it would enhance purchasing power and ratchet up the growth rate. Bad part is it would make the Fed raise rates sooner than expected.
And it would also make goods more expensive, because you would start to get, with wage pressure, you get inflation, don't you?
Yeah, I'm less worried about that, because if incomes are growing, it's okay if things are getting, there's sort of a benign level of, and 2% or so is about the benign level. Where the Fed doesn't have to raise interest rates, and you don't really disrupt the economy from the cycle.
And can the Fed raise interest rates right now when we have a GDP that, if we get another ugly GDP number this quarter, they're going to have a little bit of a problem, aren't they?
Well, you're going to get a bounce back this quarter. I mean, the question is it 3, 4?
Pent up demand from the first quarter.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. The first quarter meant nothing, that low number. There was a lot of winter in there. There was a lot of statistical noise. And the question is, the pessimists on the second quarter are now at 2.5, 3. The optimists are at 3.5 and 4. But in terms of the Fed, they're on course to end their asset purchases this year and to begin to raise interest rates in the middle of next year. I think the interest rate increases will be very gradual, very.
And you think that course is still set?
That course is still set, and I think the markets can live with that. Anything faster than that in terms of interest rate increases will present a problem for the financial markets.
Jim Awad, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Coming up, the CEO of Target pays the price for the massive security breach and the competition in the college prep business. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I don't think that television news in the United States reflects the diversity of the world. I don't think it does a great job of even reflecting the diversity of the United States.
When you are watching TV, you don't really see a lot of different cultures. There are plenty of other places that people might not even know about.
We are living in a global culture, and you cannot hide news that is happening when there's so much social media.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Time now for our business ticker, stories making news around the world. Target's massive data breach has now cost the company, the CEO, his job. The nation's third largest retailer fired Chairman and Chief Executive Greg Steinhafel 5 months after being hit by a cyber attack that saw 40 million customers' credit card numbers stolen. The breach hurt the retailer's reputation among customers and its profits. Steinhafel, who came in as CEO in 2008, had been with Target for 35 years. He's agreed to leave immediately. China announcing an additional $12 billion in aid to Africa. That's on top of the existing $20 billion already offered. China's Premier Li Keqiang pledged the funds while on his first official visit to Africa since taking office last year. The premier also offered to share advanced technology with the continent to help create a high-speed rail connecting all of Africa's capitals and thereby boosting Pan-African communication and development. General Motors is recalling more than 51,000 SUVs because of faulty software may cause the fuel gauge to read inaccurately. According to the U.S. regulators, that may result in the vehicle unexpectedly running out of fuel and stalling, increasing the risk of a crash. The recall involves 2014 models of the Buick Enclave, Chevy Traverse, and GMC Acadia SUVs. And take a look at this. Middle Eastern Airlines, Etihad Airways, has just raised the bar in luxury travel. Etihad, the national carrier for United Arab Emirates, has transformed part of the upper deck of its A380s into a luxurious flying hotel suite. The three-room cabin, called The Residence, features a living room, double bedroom, and an in-suite bathroom with shower, as well as a personal butler trained at London's Savoy Butler Academy. Expect to pay about $20,000 for a flight from Abu Dhabi to London, whether it's one or two passengers. And I am booked in that room going to Nigeria tomorrow. I checked. In tonight's Corner Office, the competition is steep to say the least. Getting into top universities today takes not only skill and determination, but also lots of preparation, including acing standardized tests. It's big business. Our next guest made a name for himself and created a successful company out of helping students maximize these test scores and getting into the college of their dreams. Scott Farber is the founder and CEO of A-List. He joins us now to tell us all about it and to tell us how students can perform well. Scott, welcome to Rise Exchange.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to just start with the concept of standardized tests and whether you, even though you're in the business, whether you think there is way too much emphasis on one test or two tests compared to 4 years of high school.
It's a great question, and the truth of the matter is universities don't look at just one test no matter what. The SAT or the ACT, the standardized test they use for college admissions, colleges really weigh that roughly equally with the GPA. So in truth, it's really sitting on par with the 4 years of work. And the standardized tests, both the SAT and the ACT, aren't about content. They're really how you apply the knowledge you've gained. So while I don't love tests for test's sake, they do have a place.
Well, if I remember the SAT, and it's going back a few years, is it really about applying the knowledge you take or really about learning to take the test? Because I went through a college prep course as well.
Sure, and actually the way that we approach it is really about trying to cultivate certain skills. So it's about really reading comprehension, it's building vocabulary. It's not studying for the test, it's because if you speak English for the rest of your life, you need a working vocabulary and reading comprehension. So what we do is we actually work directly with schools so that it's not just about a 2-month test prep plan, but really how do you build better education from 9 through 12? A lot of our international expansion is built around that model. Not so much a get quick score sort of prep class, but in fact, how do you really build these skills over time?
Do you think, though, that it's fair that you have prep courses for students who can afford it and come from wealthier families and those who do not and cannot?
I don't think it's fair at all. Actually, one of our missions is really to level the playing field, and 80% of the students that we work with don't pay a single dollar for what we do.
How do you do that?
So what we do is we work directly with the school districts. So we actually do professional development, and those budgets are set aside by the tax base already, so it doesn't cost the district any additional money. And then we wind up working to provide the textbooks and materials they would be using for a regular class anyway. So there's no actual cost to the students. So we're pretty proud of the fact that we work with so many schools in so many different areas without having a cost to the kids.
Okay, so tell me how you got started in this business.
You know, I was really lucky. I actually got just about a full scholarship to Harvard University. I never thought in a million years I'd be lucky enough to get in. And what I found out after I got in is it wasn't just about scores or GPA, but really about the rest of your application that shines through. I didn't understand that that's all that went into it, but I got my degree in international relations, was pretty convinced I'd become an ambassador. Shocked at 22, by the way, no one gives you that job. And after working in South America for a while, recognized that education was really the key to development. When I started looking at that and I realized how unequal the playing field was, I came back and tried to build something that was at some point going to be able to deliver on that promise of fundamental access.
And how does it differ then from the bigger names, Princeton and Kaplan, for example?
Sure, absolutely. I never want to build a franchise like a Princeton or a Kaplan. In fact, that's the opposite of what I want to do. I want to work with institutions, and both my parents were teachers. So while I never wanted to be a teacher because you don't want to be like your parents. Turns out it was in the blood. And so we try and really partner with local communities, which I think has really also driven our expansion because we're welcomed in as partners, not as outside providers.
And when you say you're not building a franchise, does that mean every single person who you employ in these outfits basically it works for you within the company?
Well, as you can see, it's because we work with so many teachers directly. So I've trained about 1,000 teachers inside of schools. They're really the employees of the schools delivering the class. Our international model is actually partnering with school networks. So they're, to a certain extent, really the employers of those teachers also. So we're really an IP provider.
When someone comes to you, how long does that process take then to get them prepared?
It really depends. I mean, ideally, we really start working with them over multiple years inside of the school, inside of the class day. But often when students come to us for preparation, they're beginning in really 10th grade and 11th grade, looking to get their applications ready for senior year.
All right, so some tips for students applying for college, and when do they start preparing? 9th grade, 10th grade?
I mean, it really can be at any point, but what I would really encourage them to do is listen to their parents when they say you should probably start reading. I usually tell parents, make the exchange of video games for half an hour, reading for half an hour. Try and work out some kind of deal. But the vocabulary is important at a young age. Reading is definitely at a young age. When we take a look at hardcore preparation, which is taking the tests, that's really something you don't want to overdo. Students burn out. So we look at 11th grade really for that time.
Okay. Scott Farber, CEO of A-List.
Thank you so much.
Very interesting. Coming up, imagine bad-mouthing a colleague to the whole world on Twitter. Our favorite person of the day is next here on Arise Exchange.
Here at Arise America, we want to bring you news from a different perspective, and not just news, but analysis as well. Tell me what it was like growing up gay in Uganda.
I have suffered sexual violence, including that has been planned by my family to heal me from lesbianism.
To have somebody lead your child away in handcuffs is just not something that should be done to a 12-year-old child.
You call this Victims Advocate Group, this phone number, which is sponsored by the Catholic Church, correct?
Right.
And what kind of response did you get?
They told me not to make prank calls and it wasn't appropriate and hung up the phone.
My God. Michael Dunn could go away for many decades. Is that enough for you?
No, it's not. The person that killed Jordan Davis has to be found guilty by a court of law in the United States of America.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, that person is Rakesh Agrawal. Up until this weekend, he was a senior executive with PayPal. He apparently delivered a stream of consciousness about his fellow workers on Twitter. That didn't go over so well. He tweeted a lot of bad things about the people he works with. Here's a sample. Quote, Christina Smedley is a useless piece of blank. This was on Twitter, remember. And duck you, Smedley, you useless middle manager. Smedley is PayPal's vice president of global communications. Didn't take too kindly to the words. PayPal sent out its own tweet saying, quote, Rakesh Agrawal is no longer with the company. Treat everyone with respect, no excuses. PayPal has zero tolerance. As for Agrawal, he says he was testing out a new phone and that the messages were for only a colleague. He also now claims he actually quit before he was fired. Either way, tweet this, Rakesh. You are our favorite person of the day. Coming up next, it's the 5th of May. We'll help celebrate it with a mixologist and discuss the changing tastes of the liquor consumer because, as Jimmy Buffett would say, it is 5 o'clock somewhere.
Some people claim that there's a woman to blame.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Wasting away again in Margaritaville.
Now, talk a little bit about margaritas. Cinco de Mayo, the 5th of May, commemorates Mexico's victory against the French in 1862. Many say Cinco de Mayo is actually a bigger deal in the United States than in Mexico, and say it's become synonymous with celebrating with a good drink. The drink that tops the list, of course, is the margarita. And to show us how to do it is master mixologist Brian Van Flandern. Brian, welcome to Arise Exchange. I have been looking forward to this since breakfast, honestly. What goes in to the perfect margarita?
You know, it's one of these cocktails. Americans drink 186,000 margaritas per hour in this country.
186,000 per hour?
Per hour. And it's the easiest cocktail to make. It's only 3 ingredients. It was invented by Marguerite Sames in 1860. She actually was a Dallas socialite, and she went down to Acapulco and put 3 ingredients together: fresh lime juice, triple sec, and not just any triple sec, but the original triple sec, which was Cointreau, and then 100% agave tequila. And those 3 ingredients are so important, and it's you go to 20 different restaurants, you get 20 different margaritas.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So
and the best kind are the non-frozen kind, right? Would you say there's fresh, absolutely.
And as you've been if you've been paying attention to the news,
I was going to ask you about the cost of limes. This little thing here is going up in cost and going to be more expensive to drink margaritas.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it used to be about $25 a case. Last I heard, it was about $125 a case. There was a blight. There was the Mexican cartels and other things going on. So it's all politics. But at the end of the day, it'll eventually stabilize. But for right now, interesting fact: an ounce of fresh lime juice, depending on the tequila you buy, is more expensive than most tequila. Who knew?
How big of an economy is sort of tequila and Cinco de Mayo to begin with? Because it would seem that it's only getting more popular.
Oh, yes. Well, you know, like I just said, it's the #1 ordered cocktail in North America. The margarita, it's not with rum, it's not with vodka, it's tequila. And America has this love-hate relationship with tequila, but the truth is, tequila is coming into vogue big time, especially the higher quality. Americans are just starting to get educated about great tequila.
And when you're talking about higher quality, what do you recommend then?
Well, there's so many different brands out there. You know, today we're using Cazadores from the highlands of Jalisco, which is, you know, they grow the agaves for 8 to 10 years, and they're much more mature, sweeter style agave. The key thing when you're going out and buying a tequila is you want to make sure that it says somewhere on the label 100% agave. Quality is the key, and don't buy any triple sec. It's amazing to me. You get fresh lime juice, spend all the money on the tequila, and then you chintz out on the triple sec. You've got to use Cointreau or a high quality triple sec. And the nice thing about Cointreau is it's made with 40% alcohol, just like your tequila, and it's made with a sugar beet base. So quality is the key. Quality is the key.
You know, we are starting to see some changes in the liquor market, aren't we, generally speaking? We're seeing more flavored liquors. Are Americans' tastes changing?
Well, yeah, you know, it's very funny. When I was growing up...
And I don't want to stop you, by the way, from making us a drink here. I mean, we're running out of time.
I'll mix it in there. Okay. No worries. I was just going to say, you're absolutely right. As a matter of fact, we're seeing, you know, when I was growing up, we were drinking Reuniti on ice, and we were drinking, box wines. Americans have really come into their own when it comes to...
like Bartles and James, right?
Yeah, Bartles and James wine coolers.
Yeah, exactly.
But now we discovered Cabernet and Merlot, and now it's all about all these bizarre and unusual varietals of wine. And the same thing's happening with the cocktail revolution. We're seeing that the best mixologists, the best bartenders are emulating the great chefs. They're sourcing out local fresh ingredients, they're balancing the acids and sugars, they're reducing the ethanol and creating food-friendly cocktails.
Are we seeing something similar that we see in the beer market where you have microbreweries? Are we seeing smaller companies get into the liquor business?
Yes.
Or is it just too difficult to do?
No. It's just the opposite. There's this whole revolution. Now that people are becoming more educated about spirits, we see all these craft distillers, just like craft breweries. We're seeing these craft distillers making these, right here in New York City.
Yeah, I was actually at an event where upstate they were starting to make whiskey, which is something you don't assign to New York.
That's exactly right. By the way, when you're making a cocktail, lots of ice. You want to dilute it down, get it nice and cold. You say, shake it, don't fake it, and don't forget to smile, right?
Tell me a little bit about how you become a mixologist, a master mixologist at that, because you are well known. You're all over the media.
You know,
talents are in demand.
I was fortunate enough to work for a famous chef. I opened up a restaurant here in New York called Per Se, and which was a Michelin 3-star, famous chef, Thomas Keller. And he taught me the fundamental principles of flavor profiling, which is basically trying to compose the flavors in the glass the same you would as a chef would compose flavors on a plate. And once you understand that very simple principle, all of a sudden you can start putting together.
And that's basically, and we're running out of time here, but that's basically how everything is interacting with each other?
Exactly. Exactly right. So what I've done here is we've done Cointreau, lime juice, and tequila. And actually, I'm just going to make one for you here to taste. But this is actually got a little bit of jalapeno and some cilantro in there. Give that a taste.
Terrific, Brian. We are out of time, so we're going to end the show on this. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Rise Exchange. Brian, that's terrific. Wow.
My pleasure. Cheers.
It's got a little kick to it.
Yeah.
The jalapeno is on that.
Searching for